Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on how to use your TileKit. My name is Nick Howley, I'm the founder of Alhambra Mosaic Studio, and in this video I'm going to be taking you through the step-by-step process of making your very first mosaic coaster. This kit has everything you need to get started with Islamic geometric mosaics, so you can start building your own patterns or recreating some of the most iconic and historical patterns found throughout the Islamic world. Places such as the Alhambra and Granada in Spain, the Alcazar in Seville, or Fez in Morocco. These patterns might be 1,000 years old, but there's always more patterns to discover. And because you're in control of the colours, there's an infinite number of ways to express yourself through these patterns. So hopefully it'll be a fun activity. Even if you're not creative, it should be possible to make something really nice and really personal. This tutorial covers the whole process. We're going to look at what's in the box, what's included in there, how to make your very first mosaic patterns using the tiles, painting tips and techniques to achieve a really good ceramic finish, and then how to bring it all together with glue and varnish. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it's useful to you. If you have any suggestions or comments, please put them in the comments below. Otherwise, let's dive in and let's get started.
So, what's in the box? Well, all tile kits share some essential things in common, even if they might be different in terms of the number of tiles and the size of the frame. Firstly and most importantly are the tiles. These are handmade at our studio and they're made from air dry clay. All of the pieces are made proportional to each other and they have two sides, a bigger side for the front and a smaller side for the back. Usually you'll want to have the big side face up because this is how the pieces tessellate and fit perfectly together. Next are the paints. The exact colours depend on the palette that you chose when you bought your kit, but one colour that pretty much always is included is white. Now, I know what some of you guys are going to say, white isn't colour. Well, if you want to argue that, write it in the comments. Anyway, these paints are mixed up at our studio to give your tiles an authentic glazed ceramic look, so they'll be much more liquid than the paints you might normally use, and they do leave a very nice glossy finish. Next, we have a pot of glue and a pot of varnish, 2 brushes, and the frame to put your tiles in. Finally, every tile kit includes a detailed instruction manual, most of which is going to be repeated in this tutorial video. So if you forget anything, you can always consult the manual. Now that you've got everything out, let's start working with the tiles and figuring out some patterns. So I'm going to take all the tiles out of the bag now and group them by shape so that we can see what we're working with. In the coaster set, we have 16 different shapes to work with. All of these shapes are found in mosaics, plasterwork and wood carvings across the Islamic world, and they're part of a family of shapes called the Eightfold Family, or in the Spanish tradition, the Lazo de Ocho. So they're all really important traditional shapes, and with them you can make hundreds of patterns. Now, the aim is to fill our frame with these tiles so that they can come together to form a square. Here's an example of a square that's been filled, and here's another. Ideally, we want a pattern that is symmetrical, so whatever you do on one side, you probably want to do on all 4 sides. That being said, we'll cover some special examples of two-way symmetry in a future video. Obviously, it's possible to spend hours working out how to fit these shapes together, and that's the whole point of this kit. But for this video, I'm going to show you an easy way to make patterns. In this kit, some pieces are only going to work in the center, and that's these shapes. The 8-point star, the cross, the octastar, the small square and houses, and the small square and bats. So let's take one of these shapes and put them in the middle right now. Depending on what we placed, we have a lot of options. Let's start with options with the star. One move is to surround it with these sun rays. And you'll notice that when you do this, it's the equivalent of placing an octastar. Another option is to make a square by surrounding it with notches and filling in the gaps with triangles. With the cross, there are also 2 options. Either surround it with these tent shapes, which is again the equivalent of an octastar, or surround it with acorns, again with the option to fill it in and make a square using triangles. Notice you can do exactly the same options with the house and squares, because together these form a cross shape. Finally, the square and bats act like a sort of half cross, half star, so you can mix and match acorns, notches, sun rays and tents to make lots of different patterns. Let's say you have an octastar at this stage, whether you've made it through a cross, a star, or whether you've just put an octastar down in the middle of the coaster. In my experience teaching hundreds of students, this is honestly the part where it's easiest to go wrong. If you add hexagons diagonally, or acorns or notches vertically or horizontally, you're not going to be able to make a neat square. Also, there's only really one place to put the birds, and it's not here, so I will explain their role in a little bit. As for the corner stars, well, you guessed it, they only work in the corners. But again, there is an exception, which I'll explain in a future video. So if you have an octastar, the best thing to do at this stage is to try and either make a large square or a large 8-point star using the triangles and squares in the kit. Once you have your square or your large star, it's finally time to add the frame. The most straightforward is the classic combination of corner stars and hexagons filled in with 16 sun rays. If you want to mix things up, you can replace those corner stars with acorns and fill in some of the gaps with triangles instead. But if you're working from the 8-point star, you'll see that these frames just won't work. So here are another couple of options. My personal favourite is this combination of notches and corner stars. There's an even more advanced option you can try out with the birds. Here they come, the birds. Well, the birds come in pairs, a left and a right bird, and they're designed to surround an acorn just like this. And then you can fill in the gaps with triangles. Whatever you choose, you should have by now a completed square. Now we have included enough pieces in the kit so that whatever you choose for your first coaster, you should have enough pieces of the right type to make a second coaster. It won't necessarily be the same pattern, but it will be a pattern that creates a completed square. Once you've made your second coaster, you'll still have some spare tiles, so you can even go in and do some piece swaps if you want to. For example, every acorn can be replaced with a tent and square, every notch by 2 sun rays and a square, and of course you can replace a square with 2 triangles. So play around with the patterns, and once you're happy, you're ready to move on to painting. I personally love the painting stage because it completely breathes life into your mosaics. The main rule is that generally, no 2 touching tiles should be the same colour. Contrast in colours is what helps distinguish the shapes from one another. With these paints, you can mix them if you want a specific colour. One thing I recommend is making an off-white by mixing white with a warm colour like yellow or brown. It can really change the whole character of your mosaic. But I'm not going to tell you exactly which colour combinations to use, it's really up to you. What I can do is give you some advice on how to make sure your paint covers the tiles well. First, I really recommend taking a picture of your pattern to remember it. The next stage is to take the tiles out of the frame. We need the frame to be empty so that we can put the glue in the bottom for the final step. Now, if you want to remember which tiles are going to be which colours, you can lightly pencil the colour on the tile, but it will be covered up by the paint. Once you've decided on your colours, grab a cup and a water to wash your brush, and a paper towel to dry the brush before you dip it in the next paint. If the brush is still wet, it's going to dilute the paint and leave you with a fairly thin looking coat. So make sure you dry it after every time you wash it out. Now you're ready to paint. Let's look at technique. These are very liquid paints. They're designed to look like the glaze you see on real ceramic tiles that have been fired in an oven. So we're not going to brush them on the tiles. What we're really doing is transferring the liquid, dabbing it onto the surface of the tile and letting it spread out and become smooth. It doesn't matter if it's slightly thicker in some places than others. That's going to create a really authentic finish. Once you've covered the surface, leave the tile to dry. It should take about 15 to 20 minutes. As long as you've applied a thick layer of paint, you only need to apply 1 coat. Now it might not look quite as glossy once dried out as it did when wet, but don't worry, we'll be applying varnish later and it's going to look great. So now we have our painted tiles. It's time to bring it all back together in our coaster. Let's take our glue and apply it to the bottom of our coaster using one of the brushes. I recommend a fairly thick layer so that it doesn't dry too fast. You should have about 10 to 15 minutes to move your tiles around if they're not centered. Once you've spread the glue over the bottom of the coaster, it's finally time to place the tiles. I personally like to work out from the middle, just to make sure it's fully centered, but you can work from the corners if you want. For me, this is my favorite part. It's where it finally comes together, and I'm always surprised by how quick the process is. As you can see, I'm keeping the piece as close together as possible and sometimes shifting them to keep them centered. But I'm not expecting them to be perfectly in line from the start. I can always fix that later. The hard part usually is getting the small pieces in once you get to the edges, so I do recommend adding these in before the big pieces when you're doing the outer frame. Once all the pieces are in, have a rest and congratulate yourself because you've done the hard part. Now the only thing you have to do is go over the whole thing with varnish using your brush. This will give your mosaic a fantastic gloss, but it will also make it heat resistant, so you'll be able to use the coaster with hot mugs and drinks. Once you've applied the varnish, wait 24 hours for it to fully cure, and congratulations, you've made your first geometric mosaic.
I've got to admit, I am pretty proud of this. It's a good mosaic. It's got a good finish, good shine, good color combinations. I was going to give this to my sister, but I think I might keep this one actually. So that's it. You've made your very first mosaic coaster using TileKit. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's explained each part of the process well enough that even if you haven't made one yet, you can go ahead now and make one yourself. As ever, if you've got any suggestions on what else you'd like us to cover in future videos, please let us know in the comments below. And if you've made something with your tile kits, please share it with us. It would be wonderful to inspire other people with your designs. So just go on our social media accounts and tag us with a picture of what you've made, and we would love to share it with our followers too. Anyway, that's everything for now. See you in the next video.